keep it coming. But yeah, so we're in really good hands with our moderators, is what I'm getting at.
Yeah, and I want to
Hey,
thank Barry
Donaldson.
for stepping forward to
Yes.
moderate this panel.
Can you turn your camera on just for a second so I can get you spotlighted, and then you can turn it right back off?
Eddie, your camera's down.
Yeah, I know. I have two
Okay, all
computers
good.
going here.
Hey there, Donaldson.
Hey, sorry, I'm trying to save the bandwidth because I got a hook. I'm in the office, and so I'm connecting remotely on VPN, or not VPN, sorry, a hotspot on my phone.
Understood.
So should we begin? I have 11:30. Are we good to go?
We're good.
Okay. I want to welcome everybody to this second of 3 pre-MMID mini symposiums that we're holding as lead-ins or appetizers to the main event, which is going to take place on May 2nd. Some of you may have been at the previous mini symposium, which we held on the 14th of February, and we'll have our final one on the 11th of April, which will deal with regulatory affairs. But today's symposium, as you can see, is entitled Licensing Technologies from the Military. We have, I think, an outstanding panel assembled today with an excellent moderator, Barry Datloff. And before I turn it over to the panel and the moderator, I just wanted to remind everybody about the main event coming up on the 2nd, tell you that this session today will be recorded, and the recording will be available through links on the website after the fact. We'll also make everybody's slides available through links on the website, so you don't need to take notes furiously or take pictures of the screen with your phone. And we'll have all the panelists' contact information available afterwards as well. So if there are follow-up questions you have or want to reach out to somebody in particular, you'll be able to. Also, if you have questions for the panelists, please type them into the chat box down at the bottom, and we'll address them towards the end. So let me see if I can go to the next slide here. I have a couple of introductory comments. Yeah, so the agenda is welcome to Velocity, Texas. I want to tell you a little bit about 2 events coming up. One I've already mentioned is the Military Medical Industry Day, and the other associated event is a $100,000 pitch competition being put on by the Bexar County, and that's going to be the evening before MMID at the same venue. So if you're thinking about attending MMID, you might want to come in the extra day, come in a day early and attend the pitch competition, which is free for attendees, or your company might want to apply to pitch as well. So following my few comments about that, we'll go into panel introductions. We'll have some introductory comments from Barry, and then we'll get right into the meat of the discussion. So next slide. MMID, for those of you who haven't been to any of the prior 3 events, it's the premier networking and collaboration event in San Antonio, which intends to bring together members of the military medical community and the private sector to try and foster collaboration and partnerships that lead to the commercialization of products and services that are needed by the military medical community to complete their mission. So in previous years, we've had 50+ companies. We've had a number of pre-event symposiums like this one. It's a 1-day conference. Last year, we had over 335 people attending. Next slide. Again, the date is May 2nd. You can see a QR code on here, which if you want to point your phone to that, it should take you to the Eventbrite registration page. As I mentioned, it's a full-day event from 7:30 in the morning till 5 in the evening. Some of our participants and sponsors are listed in the lower right corner down there. Next slide. And as I mentioned, the evening before MMID, we'll be having a Bear Bio pitch competition for the first time. This is really open to any company in the US that's working in the life sciences or bio sector. First prize, I think, is $75,000, and we have prizes for second place, and then I think there's a people's choice as well. And applications are currently open, although you should note there that applications close tomorrow, March 15th. So I think on the next slide, there's a QR code that should take you to the registration page for applying for Bear Bio. Next slide, please. Yeah, so as I said, there's a QR code there. The deadline for application is tomorrow. It's $100,000 in non-dilutive funding. There are very few strings attached to this. I think the only requirement is a commitment to establish a presence in San Antonio for a minimum of 6 months. So this is really for companies that are already here or considering having a footprint in San Antonio. You only need to be a device, biotech, healthcare, IT, pharma related company, and have received less than $4.5 million from third-party investors. So it's a good opportunity for early stage companies to generate some revenue. The next slide, please. So at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Barry Dadloff, our moderator, and our panelists, and let them get into the meat of the discussion. So again, thank you all for participating. I'm sure by the end of this 90 minutes, you're going to know a lot more about licensing technology for the military than you do now. So Barry, I'll turn it over to you.
Much appreciated, Corey, and may everybody have a good barbecue lunch while we speak. Please indulge. You're really looking at the good, the bad, and the ugly, otherwise known as lawyers, guns, and money. Because this is being recorded, I can't tell you all the jokes I would normally tell, as Quentin will attest. But we've got an incredibly good set of panelists who have experience from the private sector, the university sector, the government sector, because literally it takes everybody to field products for the warfighter. And disclaimer, everybody here represents their personal views, especially in the discussion, and I encourage my panelists to disagree with each other. If we could do something better or different, folks, put it in the chat. Give us ideas. We don't want to make this a one-way street. Each presenter is going to give you some slides today, just so you've got some context and background, because we're acronymal. We have more acronyms than you could shake a stick at. And even now, we keep changing them. So our personal apologies for the sheer obtuseness of acronyms. But DHA, everywhere I go, I say, who knows what DHA stands for? And needless to say, it's a brand that's still being built. And it's new, relatively, in the grand scope of the military. And today you're going to hear from Army, Navy, and Air Force DHAers, as well as our partnership intermediary TechLink that is trying to help all of us field products for the warfighter. Next slide, please. And in essence, that's the bottom line. We have to do more than research. We have to do more than pushing money and paper back and forth. We have to field products for the warfighter. What makes us different and away from HHS and NIH, CDC, FDA is that we inject our own people, our own staff, with the solutions. We save our own people's lives. And so this isn't academic. This is really about getting a job done for the person down the hall that you would like to be able to have return after a deployment to continue their good work. Next slide, please. Because it's complicated, I decided to make it, oh, darn, still complicated. So you're up there, right? What are you trying to do with DoD? We'd like to believe we could help you out today and answer some of these questions. Are you trying to work with us? Do you need money to do so? Are you trying to collaborate and use our facilities and our scientific expertise? Or are you ready, locked and loaded, ready to sell a product to the DHA or the rest of the DoD? So although this has lots of arrows, the reality is that each of us are truly responsible for all of it. And that takes time, effort, and a concerted teamwork in order to reach out and say, hey, you're ready to get an NSN to sell it through the DLA warehouse? We can help you with that. And Scott Walter is an example of somebody who's been particularly helpful for us in trying to field stuff for the first time through DLA. Next slide, please. So I'd like to turn it over to my esteemed colleague from Fort Detrick, Dr. Deal. I'm going to ask each of the folks to give their own little bio. Suffice it to say, you have to personally ascribe whether they're good, bad, or ugly. Eddie, take it away.
Thank you, Barry. Well, thanks for inviting me to be on this panel, and thank you to everyone in attendance today. I think all of us will be available afterwards via email for questions and hopefully answers. So if anything comes to your mind later, or a question gets formulated 6 months from now, please go ahead and contact us. So I've been a commercialization officer with MRDC for almost 4 years. My background started out as a professor. I then went into large pharma, and then I started participating in that whole entrepreneurial and startup phase and being part of small business, and then went back to academics. Now I'm with the Army in tech transfer, and those experiences, I feel like, first of all, I don't have to Google any of those experiences. I've been that guy that's sitting all around the table when you're talking to companies and things like that. But I think the Army is a nice hybrid of all of those environments. Okay, the very strong basic science research that takes place at universities, some of the funding issues and writing grants and things like that, the innovative research that takes place at small companies, the commitment to commercialization, and even having our own in-house regulatory folks that you'd have at a large pharmaceutical company. We have all of those things at the Army, and I'll talk a little bit about the research that's going on later. But I think it's a great environment for us internally. I think it's a great environment from which to license a technology. Next slide, please. We are located all over the United States. As Barry said, MRDC is headquartered at Fort Detrick, Maryland. It's Frederick, Maryland. Very nice place to live. I'd never been to Maryland except driving through Maryland on the way back and forth to Pennsylvania and Florida and North Carolina, but it's really a nice place to live. We have not had snow on the ground once this year, which is the only time in my life that I've had that experience, with the exception of the 1 year that I lived in Miami, Florida. So this is a really interesting place. And if you like to drive or ride, the roads around here are good. Don't go to Pennsylvania. But anyway, we're located about 50 miles from the Washington-Baltimore corridor. So it's a really hot spot for startups, funding, really great, energetic environment. There are other laboratories that are underneath MRDC all over the country, and we work with all of them. If they're doing medical and there's an innovation, it's going to come to our office. Next slide, please. We're also all over the world. One of my clients, as it were, is USAMRIID. So a lot of work with infectious disease. And wherever infectious disease happens in the world, we probably have a laboratory there or near there. Why? Because we don't know what the next theater is going to involve for the warfighter. We also don't know what is the next select agent that might be weaponized and used against our forces or our allies. So where the action is, we're there. Next slide, please. So our major investment areas are military operational medicine, combat casualty care, and military infectious disease. I won't go through these lists because everyone has access to the slides. But again, if you have any questions later, please contact us. Next slide, please. So licensing yields products for the warfighter. Here's our top areas of research and development: vaccines, therapeutics, devices, medical IT, and diagnostics. The Army is also becoming interested in a big way in AI. And within the next 2, 3, 5 years, there will potentially be products that will be licensable from MRDC in AI. Next slide, please. And here's just kind of a summary of some of the sub research areas that have come out of and products that have come out of the different foci of research at MRDC. Next slide, please. My colleague Barry, years ago, came up with this concept of assistive tech transfer or assistive T2. Now, many academic tech transfer offices do this in one form or another, but really MRDC has embraced this model of the complete picture of assistive T2. So what is assistive T2? Well, from 30,000 feet, I kind of think of it as the difference between fire and forget and wire guided firing, okay? So fire and forget, you know, you aim at the target, you fire, hopefully you hit what you're aiming at. But with the wire guidance system, you're kind of guiding all along. You have a target that you're focused on, but there's kind of nudges and readjustments as you go along the way. You're helping that projectile to reach the target the entire way. It's not just fire and forget. So obviously licensing is a big part of tech transfer. We're heavily engaged in licensing and other kinds of agreements that I'm sure that we'll talk about, things like CRADAs in this presentation. But it's much more than that, okay? There's funding. We don't expect a licensee to come to us, you sign a license and say, have a nice day. Oh, you want to work with the military? Well, go find all the funding mechanisms within the military and the federal government yourself. We have found that the staff has put together very nice lists of funding sources, different offices that you can contact within the DoD and within the federal government to help our clients be successful, because we need our clients to be successful. Again, not fire and forget, you know, sign a license, just send us the revenue, have a nice day. No, we in often cases want to buy these products back from our licensees. So we need them to be successful. So why in the world wouldn't we try to help them? Functional mock-ups, something else the Army's heavily involved in. A lot of prototyping activities with not so much with drugs and diagnostics, but with devices and IT systems. Test and evaluation. A lot of times through CRADAs, we will participate in this kind of research. But you'd be surprised at the number of technologies that are licensable that are beyond TRL 1 or 2, like you'll often find in academic tech transfer offices. Clinical and regulatory. As I said, we have our very own in-house clinical regulatory team that advises us on the clinical trials that we do ourselves in advanced development, but that can also be assistive to our clients as well. And then fielding, obviously very important. This is something that we need to do in order to get those products into the customer's hands in the civilian field for dual use technologies, as well as bring those back home to be part of the Department of Defense. Next slide, please. If you have a technology that you are interested in shopping to the Army, tech transfer is not acquisitions. We're kind of the opposite of acquisitions. We license out. However, you will not call the Army and have someone say, that's not my job. I don't know what you're looking for. Have a nice day and hang up the phone. We will always try to help people get in touch with the right person who can help them along. This is a form that Barry has put together for technology intake. If you want to talk to somebody about possibly being part of development at the Army, part of CRADA, part of possibly more, think of this form. Bluff, that's bottom line up front for any folks who aren't in the military. What is it that you're getting at? Don't give me the cliff notes. Just tell me what the title is and what you're trying to do up front. Summary of the technology, military relevance. We're kind of particular about this, and I tell people, even if the application within the Army is obvious, we still like to see you do some homework. I mean, for instance, if somebody came to us and say, we have a device that will stop hemorrhage 100% immediately. Well, what's that going to do for the Army? Well, what that's going to do for the Army is obvious. No. Spend some time finding out how many soldiers have hemorrhage, how many folks die from hemorrhage, what are the costs in terms of dollars, where do these technologies have to be used? Is it far forward? Is it back at a hospital? Is it somewhere in between? When someone sends us information that includes that, we look at it and we say, aha, this person's not just trying to partner with anyone or everyone who's going to give them money. They are interested in the DoD because they've done all this background work to frame what they're saying and to put it in a military context. And then finally, think about your stage of development. And I'll talk about that on the next slide. Over. Next slide, sorry. So know your acronyms. One of them is TRL, or Technology Readiness Level. This is obviously a bit subjective, but anytime we have a technology internally that's being evaluated, and certainly externally, we're going to ask what the TRL is. Now, it is subjective, but two people should not be looking at the same technology. And one says it's a 3, one says it's an 8, okay? You can disagree on 3 or 4 or 5 or 6, but not 3 versus 8. But if, and I would say this to people internally, but certainly externally, if someone asks you, what is the TRL of your technology? Give them a number, say, my TRL is 6. But before they come up for air, quickly give them about a 30-second pitch on why you think it's TRL level 6. It's TRL level 6 because we have a prototype, we have data, we have outside consultants that et cetera. And that way, it isn't just coming in out of the blue. If you have a presentation in which you're going to finish with, this is TRL level 6, include those bullet points again right there to say why you think it is TRL level or TRL 6, and then the discussion can begin. Next slide, please. And as I said before, the staff for years has put together these documents to help in assistive technology transfer with things like funding, things like contacts within the government. This is an example of the federal funding chart from probably put together 5, 6, 7 years ago. But we don't expect our clients to come in and figure this out themselves. You license from us, or even if you don't, you're disinterested. Here you go. Here's your pathway to at least some of the federal sources for dollars. Next slide, please. And I guess that is it for my presentation. Again, thank you everyone for being here, and I look forward to discussions at the end of the presentations. Over.
All right, I guess I'm up next. My name is Beth Dries, and I am with the Office of Research and Technology Applications at the 59th Medical Wing, which is based right there in San Antonio. I myself work remotely from Utah, where we have had a lot of snow this year. But no complaints about that. We can definitely use it. So, and I've been working with the ORDA for just about a year. So I am still learning all that long list of acronyms that Eddie referred to. My background before that, I've worked with some startups here in the local bioscience community. I also spent about 15 years in academic tech transfer at University of Utah, where I managed the fairly large portfolio of life science technologies, did a lot of licensing, working with startups and spinouts. So I kind of still have that academic perspective, and it's been very interesting for me to jump into the military environment and learn how it's similar and how it can be quite different from academic tech transfer and licensing from universities. Next slide, please. Great. So basically, you've heard about T2 and this concept of assistive T2, which I think is something that differentiates working with the Defense Health Agency and the military for licensing and developing technologies. But basically our goal, particularly at the 59th, is to provide a one-stop shopping for DHA and Air Force clinical researchers. Although we focus on clinicians and scientists at the 59th, we actually have a bit of an expanded scope now that we're under the Defense Health Agency, and we do even work with clinical researchers at other Air Force medical facilities, which is broadening our portfolio. Our goal is to foster partnerships to promote technology transfer, and there's a variety of ways we do this and different types of agreements we use. I think you heard, if you were on the earlier webinar or mini symposium last month, I think you've heard a lot about collaborative research and development agreements, or CRADAs. These are basically to promote sharing of resources and data and collaboration. So that can be a way to kind of establish a relationship with a researcher or clinician within the military environment for, let's say, testing your product, running, doing research in a more military adjacent setting. We do material transfer agreements, and those, of course, are for exchanging materials or specimen for testing or evaluation, and those can go either way. We can share data or material with you, or you can share it with us. We do other kinds of collaborations under MOUs, memorandums of understanding, both within and outside of the DoD. And of course, non-disclosure agreements to protect our IP. And then finally, licensing agreements. And these are, of course, the goal is to license intellectual property developed by the Air Force or the DHA to industry partners, and then to work together to develop and commercialize that IP. Next slide, please. So the way we do this at the ORDA, which is, again, Office of Research and Technology Applications, we, in some ways, we're kind of a customer service organization. We're helping our inventors, our clinicians, our Air Force researchers complete and submit invention disclosures. We help review those from a legal standpoint, particularly whether the invention is novel and patentable. We actually have gotten some great support recently from the patent attorneys at MRDC, so they've been fabulous. We assist in preparing and revising patent applications and also managing the patent prosecution process. Kind of the counterpart to that is as we're trying to secure our IP, we will market those patents to industry partners and seek licensing opportunities. And if we find an interested and suitable partner, we will develop patent licensing agreements that will outline the path forward for developing and commercializing that IP. And in the case that royalties result from commercialization, we will track and report those payments. Next slide, please. This is just a very small snapshot of the kinds of things that are in the DHA Air Force IP portfolio. You can see a lot of this is medical device focused. We don't have as much therapeutic directed research as, for example, the Army does. Down at Lackland at the 59th, that's where all the dental training takes place for the armed forces. So we actually do have quite a number of projects and technologies that are focused in the dental space. Another thing that we see a lot is training modules for developing, training or simulations for training medical personnel, whether that's ENTs or surgeons. And those can be commercialized. So this gives you just kind of a snapshot of the kind of things we see. And I also want to emphasize that licensable intellectual property, we always think of patents first, right? But it actually extends beyond patents. So, we might have software that could be licensed and commercialized, data sets that might be useful in a commercial setting, and also creative works, and particularly these training modules I just talked about. We actually are just in the process of executing a license for a medical training module that was developed by an Air Force nurse working at Travis Air Force Base. So it's good to be a little more broad-minded when it comes to what can be licensed and what is intellectual property. Next slide, please. This is just a snapshot of the major programs and capabilities that are present at the 59th Medical Wing. I think as you saw from Eddie's slide of where the national labs and research facilities are, that San Antonio is kind of a hot spot with regard to military medical research. We also have a clinical investigations program that does clinical trials down at Lackland. There's a strong focus on nursing research and education. Again, dental education, I mentioned. We have a focus on molecular detection and diagnostics. Of course, en route care or point of care, critical care, trauma, that's a big focus. And then trauma and regenerative medicine research. Next slide. And this is, I'm not going to go over all of this, but this is just another list of kind of research areas that the 59th is particularly strong in. Again, critical and en route care, trainee healthcare and infectious disease, clinical medicine. We are developing new focus areas and seeking partnerships in AI, just as Eddie mentioned, that as being a focus for the Army as well. Synthetic biology and also virtual reality. And of course, emergency science and triage is always of interest in a military setting. Next slide. And that's all. I just wanted, my goal here was just to give an introduction to our office, kind of give some insights into how we work with our Air Force clinicians to help them, help secure IP, help capture IP, and also how we would work with you on the outside to find opportunities to commercialize that IP. And we are led by Dr. Scott Walter, and then Mr. Jim Weissman is actually the director of the ORDA. And my responsibility is to kind of manage the intellectual property side of things, but I am assisted by David Sharon and Dr. Jesus Silvas, who are really leading the charge with regard to putting, managing CRADAs, putting other types of agreements in place. So these QR codes, you can use them to contact any of us by email, or you can send an email directly to our ORDA mailbox, and we would love to hear how we can work with you. Yeah, and thanks for the opportunity to be part of the panel, and I look forward to questions.
Thank you, Beth. All right, Quentin, looks like you're up. You're on mute. Still on mute. I can imitate him if you'd like. Hi, my name is Quentin King.
There we go. I had an unresponsive Zoom situation. No one's ever had that before, I'm sure, where the Zoom didn't work quite perfectly for them. Anyway, thanks, Barry. Thanks to the other panelists. Thanks to Corey for jumping in and providing the acronym explanations in the chat. I've been enjoying that, trying to pile on as well. So a lot of acronyms, but brief introduction. I'm Quentin King. I am an attorney, though nothing I'm going to say here could remotely constitute legal advice. You wouldn't want it from me anyway, because I don't carry malpractice insurance. So you wouldn't get a lot of remedy if I steered you in the wrong direction. But I won't be doing that today. Today, I'm going to be talking to you about federal tech transfer and TechLink. TechLink is the DoD's national partnership intermediary. We saw the PIA acronym listed in the chat, but what does that actually mean? And I'll get into that. Next slide, please. So a PIA partnership intermediary is a federally authorized entity under 15 USC 3715. And a while back, Congress looked at the federal tech transfer status quo and thought, let's do what we can to try and stimulate more spin out of federally developed technologies. So they created this statute that allows nonprofit entities that are affiliated with a local or state government to set up shop and provide support services for federal tech transfer activities. And so about 20 years ago, one such shop was set up at Montana State University, which people always wonder, why is the national DoD partnership intermediary in Montana? Well, it's just some very forward-thinking folks here in Bozeman, Montana, saw this as an opportunity, thought they had the skill sets, and TechLink's been in business supporting federal T2 ever since, specifically for the Department of Defense. We operate under what is called the Partnership Intermediary Agreement, the PIA. And like an ORDA, it refers to an office, but it will also be used to refer to individuals. PIA refers to the agreement, but also to the entity will be referred to as a PIA. So our agreement in support of the DoD-wide tech transfer enterprise is with the Air Force Research Laboratory. They manage our PIA, and it's with our host institution, Montana State University. One of the neat things about TechLink is that we're a budget line funded activity. We're managed by the Air Force, but our statement of work covers the entire DoD enterprise. And what does that mean, budget line funded? Well, it means that we're not really contractors because we're operating under this unique statutory authority. And we're not really private entities or consultants because we're fully funded. Any of the services that we provide either to the labs or to industry comes at no cost to either. We are paid for directly out of the NDAA. So that's a real benefit. In addition to supporting Department of Defense tech transfer, we also support Department of Veterans Affairs. So with that, could I get the next slide, please? What do we do? What does TechLink really do? Well, in this process from initial R&D all the way to some type of demonstrable objective impact, there are these various steps along the way. And TechLink, under our authority, under the federal statute, we really jump into this position here, this T2, technology transfer role. And really, we take this very seriously, moving technologies from the mines, from the R&D to the markets, which is commercialization all the way through actual impact. And we typically think in DoD terms of impact for warfighters, but of course, we're also thinking of impact for civilian health, for economic stimulus, for general taxpayer benefit too. I mean, tech transfer really is all about manifesting the great ideas, the value that's envisioned by our scientists and engineers, and bringing that all the way back to the taxpayers that funded that research to begin with. Next slide, please. There we go. So this is how we break down and we envision these various steps along the way. And this is what TechLink does during those discrete steps to support tech transfer. And specifically, under that T2 bucket, we look at IP evaluation, we market, and our biggest role, our biggest asset for the Department of Defense, I believe, is this facilitation role. That's where we come in to play, because these other folks that have the .health.gov or .mil listings on their email addresses, they're very, very busy, right? This is why Congress identified this need for some additional support. All of these folks who are in these order roles have multiple duties. They answer to a lot of different folks that are asking them for internal support, reporting. They manage large portfolios of IP, and they have to manage agreement compliance. So typically, the TechLink can serve as an initial point of contact. We can do some hand holding, because when we're thinking about the companies that we want to work with, the statutes, the law that allows this activity to take place really does have an emphasis on domestic small business concerns. And so while a large funded biopharma company may have a cadre of lawyers who can help navigate some of the complexities of federal tech transfer, Congress, in its wisdom, said, we really want to ensure economic development and sustainable supply chains for these products that we're trying to fill to the warfighter. So we're going to really look at small business. And because small business, particularly entrepreneurs and startups, might not have all of the internal resources, they might not have on-staff attorneys and business development support, that's where we can come in and help them navigate these steps that are required to license a federal technology, and really think through how that relationship is going to benefit the business, but then also really benefit the Department of Defense and the warfighter. Next slide, please. So TechLink's cumulative record and impact. This is stretching over about the 20 years that we've been around. We initially started as a NASA PIA, but then transferred over to the Department of Defense, I think in the early 2000s. But Since our inception, we've helped broker about 1,800 agreements. Now, as Beth mentioned, those agreements stretch the gamut. They could be MTAs, NDAs, CRADAs, a variety of agreements. But of all those agreements, about 947 were license agreements. But as I was mentioning in the prior slide, 90% of those are with small businesses, really driving home the focus of the authorizing statutes that we want to work with small businesses. We want to work with small domestic concerns because we want to ensure that the products that we're fielding are to the full extent possible manufactured in the US with all of the economic benefits there, and that we can have a stable, sustainable supply chain. Last couple of years have clearly demonstrated issues when you have to source products and materials from around the world. And when we're talking about critical life-saving technologies for our warfighters, we don't want to have to wait or navigate those types of issues. 85% of the DoD license agreements over the last 5 years, TechLink has had some touch on those agreements, whether it's an initial introduction or helping to break log jams. In any case, we like to be a party to those communications, to the negotiations, and to any step along the way that may be required to facilitate the win-win relationship. And you're going to hear that over and over again, that the best relationships really are those that are going to serve some benefit to the warfighter. But as all of the professional folks on this webinar and the ORDA offices recognize, that relationship needs to be a win for the company too. The key here, we talk about commercialization, and sometimes that can have a negative sound. People might think there's a profiteering or a money pursuit, but I like to think of it more as a sustainability effort. We need businesses that can deliver these products, and we need those businesses to exist into the foreseeable future. And the only way that happens is where those businesses can make a reasonable profit, pay their people, continue their investments in the growth and development of technology. So as of 2021, we've seen out of approximately just under 900 respondents who have executed agreements. We've got about 900 respondents to this study from which this data is pulled that covers about 1,400 agreements. We looked and surveyed those companies, those licensees, and asked them, about their sales, who they sold to, lots of great information resulting from these types of partnerships that we're talking about today, licensing technologies from Uncle Sam specifically here, the medical space of the DoD portfolio. But across the board, this data is not limited to medical space, but across the board, across the DoD, from about 900 respondents who've reflected about 1,400 agreements, we've seen about $1.7 billion in sales to the U.S. military. Total direct sales, this is military and civilian, about $3.5 billion. And then when you run those numbers through the current accepted models for economic multipliers, what we've seen in this data is that it's been about just under $10 billion in total economic output. And what that means is, you've got sales, you've got direct sales to the military, to civilians, but what you've also done is you've created jobs, you've created tax revenue. And the folks who are receiving these very livable salaries under relating back to these license agreements that support startups, they go and spend money. So we're looking at the overall impact on the U.S. economy that results from these types of relationships, these partnerships between private industry, leveraging the research investments of the Department of Defense. Next slide, please. So what does TechLink do? Well, every month, whether we like it or not, we receive a bunch of information from the USPTO, and we're continually looking at publicly available published patent applications and issued patents. And we review them on average about 600 patents a year, on average about 400 applications a year. And this covers the entire spectrum of research focus for the DoD. So it could be medical. There's a substantial representation of medical technologies, but we're also looking at energy, communications, environmental technologies, or materials. There's a broad spectrum of DoD interests. It's quite frankly, it's not, as this panel illustrates, it's not just bombs and guns. There's a lot of very applicable technologies out there that have very clear dual use civilian and military applications. So we review that IP when it comes out, when it's first published. And then for the folks that understand that patents, after a while, the USPTO charges you some rent to maintain those patents, called maintenance fees at 3.5, 7.5, and 11.5 years. When those due dates for your rent payment to keep that patent in effect come up, TechLink will look at those DoD patents again to see, where are we at? Has it been licensed? Does this still have value? And that's really helpful because sometimes the breadth of available technologies can be overwhelming, and we may have missed it, or a very useful technology may not have been evident to an industry partner who could have really benefited from. So we go back and we look and we really check to make sure that the investment in the R&D to develop the technology and the investment in securing patent protection has really been fleshed out. And to the extent possible, we want to hand that off to a company that's going to turn that into a product, to some beneficial product for the warfighter and the U.S. taxpayer. When we're evaluating, we're looking for a couple key factors. Really, it's reduction of practice, right? We know that patents can be conceptual, but we really want to see evidence that there's been reduction, that we have a solid data set, that there is prototypes where applicable, that it's moving. If it's clinically relevant, we want to see it moving up through animal data and on its way to human trials as appropriate. And then we want to make sure that this is an issue or it's a technology that really has some commercial viability. At TechLink, we've got a broad scope of expertise and background. We have a lot of industry experience. And so we're looking at it from the angle of why should industry care? And we'll make those determinations and invest in some specific marketing and promotional activities based on that assessment. And then, of course, we're always looking at relevance to DoD needs. Now, I would like to sound altruistic and say that's really all about benefiting the warfighter, and that is a significant component to it, yes. But there's also the relevance that for industry, having a DoD customer is not a terrible thing. And so where it makes sense, we want to see that there is a DoD interest so that our private sector partners can hopefully go back and deliver this product for the benefit of the warfighter, but also count on a sustainable customer for that product. And lastly, we'll go through, and to the extent we can identify, we'll pull supplemental information for an industry partner who may want to read and evaluate the intellectual properties that are available. Next slide, please. So our primary asset, and this is me just speaking frankly, I think for the DoD, if you've navigated government websites, some look better than others. Sometimes there are challenges and technical constraints if you're operating within the DoD or behind the wires, they say. But TechLink has the freedom to operate outside. And so we have flexibility in the mechanisms by which we can engage with industry. One of those flexibilities is the ability to create a database and a website that is searchable by anybody who's participating in this webinar. And we've invested substantial effort and resources into really trying to develop a useful, searchable tool. That's not the easiest thing to do, particularly when you're talking about intellectual property and finding all the search terms and buckets. And it's, again, the amount of data and IP that's out there can be overwhelming, especially if you're looking for a specific solution for your business interest or the problem that you're trying to solve. It can be overwhelming. And hopefully what you'll see when you come to this website is that you'll be able to quickly filter and identify technologies that are in your space. What you'll also see is that if you're not seeing exactly what you want. There are opportunities to reach directly out and communicate with folks like myself and my colleagues at TechLink who can do further investigation and help talk through some interest. Again, the focus here being medical today, but perhaps in your particular interest, you have a medical solution, but maybe what you need at some future point is a cybersecurity solution. Or maybe you've got that medical device that is going to work perfectly, but you need a new material that might not neatly fit under the medical space technology. So when you go to the TechLink website, you'll be able to search by all of these different types of technology buckets, and hopefully almost invariably, folks come away with something of interest. As Eddie noted, there's AI, and we will be fleshing that out as well. I've got some great MRDC technologies out of Tatric, more acronyms where they're looking at predictive analytics. So really excited to see that. Pretty much it's a candy store for entrepreneurs is what I like to think of our website. Next slide, please. So this is, again, kind of a rehash, as Eddie noted, and some of the other folks. These will be made available, but I just want to focus on a couple points, again, that TechLink has a across the service view. The focus of any individual order is the lab that they serve, and their visibility into the broader portfolio sometimes can be limited. Even in a space like medical, these folks may have a firm understanding of the medical technology in the space, but I would suggest it's probably difficult to keep track of all the patents that are being produced in the labs that are outside of the medical space. So that's where TechLink can help, is providing this broad umbrella of visibility into the entire Department of Defense portfolio. Currently, we're on our website, I believe it's upwards of 6,000 active patents that we maintain a database of. So something for everyone there. Again, the other thing that I like to point out is that TechLink is neutral in the fact that we're fully funded. We're not going to charge for service. We've spent a long time working alongside the order roles. We understand what their constraints are, who they have to answer to, what statutes they need to comply with. And so we can really help early in the engagement, frame the conversations in what we think will be the most productive way so that we can speak to each other's best needs and highest ideals of what a partnership should look like. And that can really speed things along, but it can also help prevent miscommunications down the road and ultimately, we believe, lead to better partnerships between the government and private industry. Next slide. Again, this is really what it's all about from our perspective. I take the time again to say that TechLink is a partnership intermediary. We don't speak for the Department of Defense. We don't speak for industry. We really serve as the facilitator role. And what you learn quickly in this space of technology transfer, whether it's business to business, academic, or in this case, federal government, the best relationships are the ones that really have the mutual benefit, that recognize the interests from both sides, because it's just not worth the effort, quite frankly, from either the government side or the industry side, if we're not all on the same page from the get-go. That's what we want to help set up, is a strong foundation that manifests in solid agreements that deliver useful products for the warfighter. And with that, I think I'll reserve the balance to Barry and any other questions, or to Donald.
Thank you, Quinn. And I want to thank Barry for making me go last, because I am the new kid on the block. I recently joined Navy about 5 weeks ago, so this is entirely new to me in terms of the way that the military works. Like Beth, I have academic experience prior to joining the Navy. I was actually at the University of Southern California doing tech transfer for them, and managed quite a big portfolio, and had several people working for me managing a portfolio of medical devices and therapeutic compounds. So very varied in my experience with those kinds of technologies and contracts. So my talk is actually going to be pretty simple, and I'm going to spare probably rehashing what's already been said. and give the audience an opportunity to actually ask questions. So with that, I'm going to go pretty quickly through my slides, and we go to the next slide. And mostly this is just going to be introduction. So I am the ORDA, and it just so happens we are, my office is called the Office of Partnerships and Business Development. My office handles the G2 agreements. I stole some of Beth's comments for this slide because I think it was pretty simple and pretty self-explanatory. I function the same way as she does in terms of getting these things completed for the people here in the Navy. Wanted to also point out that in this particular slide, and I'll go through with you all as well as the next few slides about the structure. So Navy Medical Research Development Enterprise is actually encompassing several different labs across the country. And I think Eddie pointed it out at least in his geographical slide of the international labs there, but those are the ones that I particularly manage. Next slide. And same sort of functions. I do IP, CRADAs, MTAs or LP CRADAs is what they're called here in the military, which is a new new term for me to understand, as well as all the acronyms. I think what's important for people to know is also you probably have seen there was a lot of overlap between the different kinds of labs across the different branches, and all with the goal of helping the warfighter. But we have an infectious diseases. We're also in there. Combat casualty. We're also in that space. Physical, mental health, and behavioral health. So we also have we both have clinical research as well as basic science research, and it goes through again all of these different kinds of sort of core capabilities and different kinds of labs. Next slide. More of the same, sort of just giving everybody an intro as to what Navy has been doing. And if any of these things sort of interest you, I am obviously a point of contact, as well as I guess my colleague Quentin. If you search on the website and you find something, then there's another way for you to connect. But there are mechanisms, different ways for you to connect with people in the different branches for interests in technologies and working with the military. Next slide. A little bit more. This is the organizational. So Navy Medical Research Center is where I'm at, located here at RARE, here in Silver Spring. And those are the subordinate labs below, which is at NAMRU and Naval Hospital Research Center, which is out in San Diego. And these are, if you look at the map, which will be the next slide, kind of go ahead to the next slide. Yeah, these are the locations of where the Naval Research Medical Development locations are. Pretty self-explanatory. Everybody will get these slides so they can take a look at that at their leisure. Go ahead and next slide, please. A little bit more detail as to the specific focus of each of those labs. Not gonna read it all off. I'm sure everybody can go ahead and just read it when they get the slides. Go ahead, next slide, and go ahead on to the next slide. So I think this slide and the next slide are pretty important, sort of representative of what kinds of patent filings recently that NMRC has done recently. You can see that there's therapeutics. So there's vaccines, there's diagnostics. There will be some medical devices mixed in. So this gives people a sort of a general understanding of what's coming out of these labs and out of Navy. So these are more of the recent sort of filings that we've had. Go ahead, next slide. And I think what's important here is show some of the sort of good things that have happened from the research, the actual products that have been developed from Navy research. So as you can see, a couple of drugs, a couple of let's see, lab sort of type of technologies, both diagnostic and actually the dynabeads would be like a reagent. So this is kind of it ranges in the kinds of offerings that we might be able to share with you folks if you're interested in helping develop some of these things. So very varied, very broad. And I think for me, I think the next slide is just my contact information. Yep. So like I said, point of contact, learning the ropes. So forgive me if I might say something a little bit wrong. That's why I got Barry. and Eddie and Beth behind me to help me out. So if anybody's interested in any particular Navy space, let me know. I'm happy to have a conversation with you and figure out how we can work together. So with that, mine was pretty simple. And again, thank the other panelists for setting me up, because it was quite nice for you guys to describe sort of our processes and things, because it's pretty much the same. And
Many
with that, I
thanks,
guess I hand it off to Barry. Barry, it's all you.
Excellent. And thank all of you as panelists. We have a chat that's open. We'll take questions instead of by video and audio in the chat. And if there aren't good questions, we'll ask some bad ones. So the first one up is whether there's a uniform template for license agreements across the services. And my question for Corey is, how much do you think it would actually cost to do that? You want to take a crack at that, Quentin? You're in the middle.
Yeah, I'm happy to take a crack at that. And so the reality is that no, there's just not, right? Because today's webinar is medical, right? So at least there's a commonality of interest in terminology, jargon. We'll think in terms of clinical trials, where if you're working at a shipyard, a Navy shipyard, and you're looking at paints and coatings to prevent oxidation, that's not something relevant. So the short answer is no, because the technology spaces, the way the labs are looking at their development goals, they're going to have some unique interests and commercialization objectives based on the technologies they're producing. Now, that said, within market segments, areas and R&D segments where there is substantial overlap, while we don't currently have uniform licensing templates, we are seeing focus on consolidation for the sake of efficiency within the Department of Defense. And I'm sure we'll see some evolution within DHA, but also for the benefit of industry, right? I mean, we want to see some consistency when you're industry and you're going to engage for a technology, especially if you're going back as a repeat customer. But even still, while we want that efficiency, we always want to respect the uniqueness of the technology, the uniqueness of the commercialization goals, and the uniqueness of the partners' capabilities and interests and how they plan to do that. So a lot of variables there, and I think there's intentional flexibility and diversity that benefits both sides.
So if you're going through a procurement and you have to comply with DFARS, you obviously have to comply with DFARS. Stevenson Weidler gives us the ability to negotiate with a company, a meeting of the minds, and a true business relationship in which all of the multiple variables, compensation, timing, development plans, are both negotiable upfront and modifiable throughout. In a lot of DoD entities, there's more rigidity to the process. We have to field the product. We can't just say, as Eddie mentioned, here's your money, here's your license, go away, come back later. For that to succeed, we would like to adapt best practices, which of course change in an industry all the time. But I think Corey is onto the nut to crack, which is, why should the Army, Navy, and Air Force be any different in the same exact kind of technology deal just because they originated in the services but are now consolidated literally into the Defense Health Agency? And that's something for DHA leadership to address in the future. More questions, please. Well, then we'll have to ask Air Force one. So when you talk about dual use, non-military use, how much of your portfolio really has what I'm going to rephrase as multi-use? Because it's not just civilian, there could be other militaries around the globe.
So this is for me?
Yes.
Oh, okay. You know, I think most of what what is developed in Air Force medical research is applicable outside of a military environment. You know, so its use within a military environment might be a little different, but a lot of the things I've worked with are basically surgical devices, medical devices. For example, these two of the doctors I work with have developed a kind of new type of device for use during nasal surgery, like sinus cavity surgery, for delivering drugs during the surgery or stopping bleeding in a way that's more precise. Basically, it's designed to be precisely positioned. And so while there certainly would be a need for that in military surgery due to trauma or injury, that's also something that would have applications, let's say, in plastic surgery, in rhinoplasty or things like that. So my feeling is that most of the things we see, there are practical applications outside of a military environment. And I think that's one of the things that is going to be generally true about medically directed research. I mean, we're not developing jet fuel or missiles or things that are, purely used in a military environment.
Excellent. Another question is whether or not technologies are available to license through TechLink or through the DHA lab. Quentin, I think that speaks to you.
Yes, it does. So I'm going to restate what I said during the introduction, is that TechLink is an intermediary. We do not officially represent the views of the Department of Defense when it comes to licensing terms and conditions. Those positions and representations are only authorized by the folks like, Barry, Beth, Eddie, and Donaldson here, who are in those direct roles. What we do is we try to broadcast the opportunity, and then where appropriate, we try and help prime the conversations, because there is some process, as you might imagine, with the federal government, and in providing the appropriate information to these order role individuals so that they can make the assessment and really have an expeditious discussion about license. So the short answer to that is that you will see them potentially available through the lab's direct marketing and outreach mechanisms, but you will likely also see them available as listed as available by TechLink. But in listing them as available, what TechLink is saying is that these are DoD-owned technologies, and we're going to help connect you with the folks you need to speak with to really evaluate and investigate whether there's a bona fide commercial opportunity for you.
Thank you, Quentin. Corey, you inadvertently led to really the identification of another holy trinity, which are contractors, civilians, and PIAs. So the audience does need to know that PIAs are not authorized to negotiate anything. Neither are contractors. U.S. civilians are the only ones who can negotiate on behalf of the federal government. The signer of any license agreement has to be a director of a laboratory or their boss, somebody who's received delegated authority. So even Eddie and I can't sign a CRADA. We're, like Quentin, there to help, but it is critical in that at many trade shows and exhibitions, you'll come across a lot of folks who are part of our ecosystem, many of whom are contractors, and will ultimately get you to the point at which you have a negotiating party. That's one of the first rules of contracting. Know if the person across the table has authority to sign. Next question up from Thermocuff is, what type of studies are done on technologies, and do they need to be cleared by the FDA prior to actually out-licensing to industry? Eddie, could you take a crack at that? You're on mute. Mute. There you go.
I have two computers. The mouse is to my USG computer, and I'm playing around. No, the cursor's not moving. I'm cursing at it. cursing at the cursor. There we go. But this is my own laptop.
Recursive, Eddie.
Yeah, because Zoom doesn't like our USG computers. The short answer to the first part of that question is, as I said, we do have a regulatory group in-house. We do clinical trials on some technologies that are chosen to advance development. We do partner with companies on selected really wanted technologies and take them through clinical trials. We do not necessarily license out technologies that even have human data. Okay, we license out technologies anywhere from TRL1 up. Some things, some technologies will have associated clinical data. Some will have extensive animal data, extensive NHP data, but no human data. And some will have only tissue culture data, for instance. So there's kind of a broad spectrum. But having said that, I thought of a question as we were going, and this kind of relates to that. Quinn was talking about their website and how you can search for things. I mean, how do you're interested in technology in Ebola? How do you find that? Well, you can go on the TechLeak website, which is a very nice website, and see if they have any technologies in that area. MRDC, the Medical Tech Transfer Office, has a very nice website that's very searchable as well. But those are almost always patented technologies. We have a lot of technologies that are not patented. These are biological materials, they're reagents, they're antibodies, they're all sorts of things, okay? Far more than we could ever get on the website. So if you're interested in a technology area, first of all, as Quentin said, call them if you don't, if you have questions about their website. Call us as well. But if you don't see what you like on the website, you have interest in some other area, you go in the hardware store, they don't have the color paint you want. You go up to the counter, it's like, don't you have any in the back? And then somebody's going to huff and puff back to the manager and pretend they talked and come back and say, just what's on the shelves. No, we love to go in the back. We love to go ask if there's anything in the back. We will have those conversations because we know the folks at USAMRIID and Tatric and Rare. We'll go have those conversations to see if there's anything in the back. Remember, the Army's been doing research for many years. There are Revcos, I always say that the Revcos at USAMRIID are like that last scene in the first Indiana Jones movie, okay? There's a lot of stuff there. But we can dig in there and find out if we have the reagent or the antibody to some select agent, for instance, that you're interested in, some vaccine candidate, okay, that maybe the Army was working on 20 years ago, but we still have that reagent. We can find that stuff. So please, if you don't see it on the website, give us a call.
Much appreciate that, Eddie. Beth? On mute. Still on mute, Beth?
Sorry about that. Yeah, I want to circle back to the question about the FDA, because as someone that came from an academic tech transfer background and now being in this environment, this is one of the things where working as a licensee with the military seems to, differ from the academic situation. So, we do license out technologies at all stages, like Eddie said. So some will be very early stage, preclinical, maybe not a lot of data. Others, might be further along and have a more complete data package. But, kind of the difference between a university licensing and the military is that I did many university licenses, and typically the burden is on the licensee, on the company, completely on them to develop the technology, get regulatory approval, figure out how they're going to pay for that, and meanwhile, the university is harassing you constantly about, paying your milestone fees and that kind of thing. So in the military environment, one of the advantages of licensing our IP is that we're able to provide a lot of support, which can include assistance with regulatory support. I know that Dr. Walter at the 59th is very involved in a number of projects where we are, working hand in hand with the prospective licensee. And that's because our goal, as it was stated, early on, the bottom line up front is to develop a product, to provide to the warfighter, provide support for their efforts. And so we're invested in seeing that product come to market and be available for use within the DoD and hopefully also benefit the general public. So the answer is that FDA clearance isn't required, but we are there as a partner to assist companies that license our technology to get them through FDA approval and onto the market.
Thanks. Thank you, Beth. Donaldson, you're located in the same building as the Walter Reed Army Institute of Research. Could you comment on if a company needs something from Air Force in San Antonio, Army at Rare, Navy at the same location? Can you do a two-way, a three-way, a four-way agreement to work together?
Being new, I've seen them. I haven't actually worked on them, but the answer is yes. There is the opportunity to do that, and there's a few of them always happening at any given time. So yes, the answer is yes.
So we have some companies online, and needless to say, they have great technologies. DoD is not NIH. And what I mean by that is not invented here. Some people are, and you'll always run into them. But we need to field a product, whether it's the companies or a DoD product. We should be agnostic. I invite everybody who actually has a technology of interest to DoD and the warfighter to approach DoD about the collaboration necessary to get it to the actual warfighter. We do plenty of funding in the SBIR world to keep you guys afloat until you have your next great idea. But at the end of the day, wouldn't it be good if we really could talk to you about how to make the form, fit, and function of that technology fit the military space? And that includes more than just the physicality of it all. If it's not procurable, it's not going to get used. If there's not a way for us to get it quickly far forward, it's not going to get used. If you look at diagnostics in particular, very far forward, well, we can't bring the refrigerator, the freezer, and a giant energy source to power all that. So we're always looking for folks who may have solved the problem for themselves, and then we look at it and say, hey, that also solves our problem over here. And think about the home testing and the variety of diagnostics that we've all tried for COVID tests at home, some of which our kids could use and some of which we couldn't use. So we're looking for solutions, and frequently it's cross-fertilization of those solutions that matter the most. At this point, I'd actually like to turn it to Beth Donaldson and Eddie to mention a technology that might be burning a hole in their pocket. Because the people on the call are potential licensees that may have complementary technology or a better technology. We shouldn't be NIH about that. And my apologies if anybody is on from the NIH. Beth, what's burning a hole in your pocket?
Well, we have a technology that we are kind of seeking to repurpose. It was licensed, but the licensees, priorities have changed. But it's one that still has a lot of potential to be used, particularly in probably emergency transport type situations. And and I'm afraid I'm not an expert on the actual design of it, but this came during the beginning of the COVID pandemic. Several of our researchers developed a prototype for a a mask that fits over the nose and mouth and provides negative pressure. And the idea, these guys are ENT surgeons, so they're always sticking things down your throat or whatever. And, you know, there's obviously a big risk during that kind of surgery. If you're working on someone that has an infectious disease, the surgeons are exposed. And so this was a big concern during COVID. And so they developed an apparatus that would allow them to safely perform these procedures without being exposed to aerosols and things like that. And I think the challenge with this one is that the concerns that were present, 3 years ago during the height or the beginning of the COVID pandemic and before vaccines were available, that's kind of died down now. So, but the product also has other, potential applications. You can think of all sorts of times when you're transporting people with infectious disease or something like that, but they need these surgical procedures. So that's a product that we would like to find a partner that we can brainstorm potential use scenarios and look for a way to repurpose that IP for a more broad use.
Thank you, Beth. Eddie, you're on mute.
Learn American Sign Language. The Army is very strong in genomics, which I didn't know until I got here, which is unfortunate. I want everybody to know the Army is strong in genomics. One of our Army scientists was tasked with being able to diagnose COVID in anywhere from 50 to 100,000 samples in one day. And he figured out a way to do it with a unique single barcoding system using NGS, and he's able to do that. They are up to over 100,000 potential samples in one day. The application for this, you could screen an entire aircraft carrier. You could screen an entire battalion in one day prior to deployment to see who's sick. That one is burning a hole in my pocket. Industry was trying to do this for years. He did it in 6 months with his team. They got it working. They have 43,000 validated primer sets for COVID. Now, this is a platform technology, so you can actually dumb that down from 100,000, maybe test 50,000 or 20,000 for multiple diseases in one day. The price point on this assay, they estimate to be anywhere from $5 to $10 per sample. What's the application for this in industry? Well, you name it. How many people do you need to screen at the border per day? How many people maybe should be screened before they get on a cruise ship and before they get off in one day? Multiple samples in one day. And again, the opportunity to screen more diseases, slightly fewer people. That one, it's a fantastic technology, and I think it's going to take off, but need the right partner. Over.
Thank you, Eddie. Donaldson, I know you're new, but if you have one that's burning a hole or about to burn a hole, feel free.
Not sure burning a hole, but I'm going to give a little bit of a pub to TechLink and Quentin's group, who's helping us market one of the technologies that I'm going to be talking about. It's a endotracheal tube that seems to be of interest to a number of different parties. So for those of you who are interested in endotracheal tubes, we apparently have one that people are looking at pretty closely. So so thank TechLink for doing some of those introductions. I believe I've been working with, was it Brittany, Quentin, in your group? So Brittany's told me about it, so I do know about that one. So if anyone's interested in endotracheal tubes, please feel free to reach out.
Well, I just learned something new, and yes, I am. Please reach out to a company called Surgicure out of Boston. They're particularly interested in holding those tubes in place, and if you've got the best tube and they've got the best holder, you might actually have a product that does double duty. Our job is to connect people, and that's similar to TechLinks. But since we only have a few minutes left, I really wanted to find out from Quentin whether there was any truth to the rumor about the scientist at MSU who decided egotistically to clone herself and created an absolutely perfect physical clone, but mentally the clone had some challenges and would curse at everybody, including Quentin. And rumor has it that this scientist couldn't take it anymore, and one night actually pushed her clone right off a cliff. And Quentin, is it true that the police arrested her? And what did they charge her with? You're on mute.
All of that is true. And
Thought so.
I'm trying to remember the counts to the indictment, Barry. I think you did some research on the story. You followed it. Barry's got like 3 or 4 police scanners all the time running in his office. He's very keen to know what's going on around him. Gosh, what was the charge again, Barry? You're gonna have to refresh my
I think
recollection.
they wound up having to arrest her for making an obscene clone fall.
That's it. That was it. That was the one. I was reviewing the statutes, and it's felony. That's a felony in Montana.
Especially in Montana.
Yes.
With that, we always try to end exactly on time. Corey, we turn it back to you.
I didn't see that punchline coming, so thank you for that. Nicely done, gentlemen. I want to thank the moderator and all the panelists today. This was really great. I mean, I've been in this role of military medical innovation director for several years now, and I learned something, and I hope the participants who were viewing this webinar today appreciate the value of the information that was presented. I'm really happy these slides are going to be available because there's a lot of condensed information and knowledge there that I think people should be taking advantage of. So again, I want to thank everybody's time. Thank you for your time today and sharing your knowledge. I want to remind everybody about the last in the series of 3 webinars. It's going to be the second Tuesday in April, which is April 11th. The subject will be FDA regulations as they apply to development of products specifically for use by the military. And then the 2 big events in May, the 1st and the 2nd, which is the pitch competition, which will be the evening of Monday, May 1st at the Convention Center in San Antonio, followed by the full day Military Medical Industry Day, also at the Convention Center. And registration is open for both those events now, and I encourage you to go to the website, register, and get even more of this great information building. So, I mean, companies that approach me in my role have generally wanted to know what is it the military is interested in, what are their requirements, what are the mechanisms for getting the Department of Defense to help share some of the burden of financing the work that needs to get done. What are the local resources in San Antonio that can help me work with the military, whether it's the Henry M. Jackson or Geneva Foundation or others. Questions that were answered today: how can I find out how to license technologies from the military, and how can I sell my products to the military? And then we'll also focus on some local San Antonio companies that have succeeded in developing and marketing products to the military. So I'm hoping that those of you participating in the webinar today and your friends will, I see Caitlin just put some information in the chat there about registering. So I hope you'll join us May 2nd. And again, I want to thank everybody for their participation today. Unless any final comments from the panelists or Barry? All right.
We're good.
Thank you very much.
Have a great day, guys.
All right. Bye all. Thanks again.
Thanks, everyone.
Cheers.
Thanks, everybody.